Is this just season 3 but no book spoilers?
Yes, but now I got to end it because we just began.
Why can't we start with that?
All right, we'll begin. All right, why not?
So answer my question.
Yeah, we're not going to go into any book spoilers. Hello,
Okay.
everybody. Yeah, nothing beyond season 3. We're going to talk about Game of Thrones that just ended. Well, a week ago, but whatever. There was stuff going on. Eric Goldman here, joined by Matt Fowler, Roth Cornett. And yeah, let's just kick it off with your overall impressions. The third year of the show that we all love in general. But what did you think of season 3? We'll begin with you, Matt.
I love season 3 with a few reservations here and there, but I just want to state at the outset that even my reservations, the stuff that I might be complaining about is still better than 90% of what's on television because it's Game of Thrones and it's quality material anyway. But I think one of the things that this season, for the first time, was under focus a little more than the previous 2 seasons was the structuring because of the source material, A Storm of Swords.
Yeah.
And the first 2 seasons sort of had solid books to go on where we knew how it would end. With this, we didn't really know. If we read the books, didn't really know where the ending point would be. We did know, I think most of us knew that the Red Wedding would be in episode 9, because 9 is usually now reserved for like the big, holy F moments. But and even to do that, they had to sort of move up the Red Wedding a little bit from the book itself. But overall, I thought it was great. Jamie, had a huge, wonderful arc. They brought the Tyrells in and actually made them more, vital and interesting characters than they appeared as in the books. But other than that, there was a little problem with some characters seeming really important at the beginning of the season and then sort of fading out at the end, and not get sort of given, at least seasonally, a closures type scene that would have sort of been more of a satisfying capper to their story. But other than that, it's great. Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones, and it's even the stuff that's written for the show that's not in the books. Sometimes it's even better than in the books itself. The dialogue that Weiss and Benioff are able to come up with, along with Vanessa Taylor and Cogman and a lot of the other writers, is just really good stuff.
Yeah, I think that you have to really think about the fact that they are inventing several scenes that they feel like they're from the books, which I think is high praise. Roth, what did you think overall of season 3?
I loved it. Matt sort of just encapsulated that very well. Those are my thoughts pretty much. That I think the structure of this season, I think one of the things is as more and more characters start to get introduced, it becomes a little more challenging to focus on an arc and on character development. I know that a lot of people sort of like the episodes where we see a little bit of everybody, kind of like in the finale. And I think that's important too. But I like the episodes where we're able to focus on 2 or 3, usually 3, and get a little more in depth with them. We weren't able to do that much this season. I think, again, like to your point, Matt, it's Game of Thrones. So this is like the highest end of production value, of performance, of writing, I think, on television. I mean, certainly it's comparable to whatever your favorite show is. I think Game of Thrones is probably comparable in terms of the quality. But yeah, there are some little caveats like that. I happen to like the quieter moments. I happen to like the reflective moments that happen, sort of that we see happen between Cersei and Tyrion sometimes and things like that. But yeah, I really like the season, but those are my little caveats. And there's one character that I think we'll get into a little more later that I understand why they handled him the way they did, but I'm not sure it totally worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I loved it. In general, I would walk away saying this is still and remains my favorite show on television.
Yeah, I like the episodes that are more focused than the rest and whittle down the stories to just a few characters, which doesn't happen very often. I'm actually not a big fan of the ones where we just spend a minute with a character and then move on. I think it sets a strange precedent, because what happens is throughout the whole season we just checked in with Stannis and Melisandre and Davos. We just spent small moments with them, and then the finale had a huge part of it that you weren't kind of expecting. They were a huge part of the finale, and I don't want to come out and say that that's a bad thing necessarily, because all the scenes are great, but structurally it's kind of wonky. Especially, and then again, like the characters you spend a lot of time with, like Marjorie Tyrell and Jamie and Brienne, then all of a sudden in the finale, the Tyrells aren't even in it, and Jamie's given the one small scene. So it just feels a little clumsy in that respect. So, but I really do like the moments when you can really focus on. Like, I think it was Second Sons that it was just 3 stories.
Yeah,
not everything can be Blackwater. Like, who knows when they're going to be able to actually do that again in such a way of just focusing on one location. But 3 stories and coming back to it is really well. And I also think that, kind of like with the books, if you've read the books, you wind up having your favorite, like, my favorite Arya arc was in book 2 or something. But I think they did a really good job this season of, actually making her season 3 arc better than it was actually in the books. But, again, like Jon had a better story than he had in season 2. Daenerys had a better story than she had in season 2, kind of following the way the books worked out too,
Yeah.
Like just more eventful things happened and more, the stakes were raised, and Jon felt much more like a participant in his story this season than he did last season, when he was just witnessing things and listening to the Watch Commander the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the challenge. The challenge of the show is that the adaptations, I think, became increasingly complex, right? I feel like in the first season, like the book, you're establishing the world, you're establishing the character, and you're really focused on getting to know kind of the Lannisters and the Starks. I mean, there's other characters, certainly, but that's the focus, and that lends itself to a much more focused season. I love the show, and I love how it's evolved, but yeah, like I wish that there were a way to get all of the story in and still have that streamlined focus. I just don't think. I think they've done a tremendous job with a Herculean undertaking, with these books. And anyway, Eric, you haven't talked yet.
Well, no, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, a lot of what you guys are saying. It's such a phenomenal show. I think it was another excellent season. I think that they did a lot of things really well. I really love the Tyrells and getting to know them. And a lot of that was invented for the show, but this show has done a very good job of doing that, of introducing these things that were off camera, off page in the book, and extrapolating upon them and saying, okay, we kind of get an idea of Marjorie, but let's go more into that. At the same time, I think a lot of the characters we already loved had some great storylines this season. A lot of really well done twists and turns as far as where things like Tyrion and Sansa's stories, and they both had a lot going on, but then how they intersect in such a direct way was really well done. Jamie and Brienne's journey. But yes, I agree that it's a problem that is implicit in the show as they go on. So many characters, but I do think sometimes they're a little clumsy with how they try to include so much at once. I think about how, say, the Reigns of Castamere, which is such a phenomenal hour of TV, but had that one Sam scene, and it felt very extraneous.
It was only there so that he could talk about the Black Gate at the Night Fort.
Yeah,
which happens in the finale. So you need to know that one bit of detail about the gate that you can go through the wall.
Yeah,
right. So.
It's there as a little bit of exposition to prep you for the next episode. And yeah, it did feel, you're like, why are we with Sam for a second? I love Sam, but why are we with Sam for? And we know why. I think the other thing that's hard, and I don't know if you guys find this, I think the other thing that becomes a challenge even talking about this show is that the people that have read the books are judging things based on the books and what they want to see, A, like as always happens with an adaptation, but B, they're looking at characters knowing where they're going to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what's going to happen in their storyline. So if they're looking at whoever it is, they're judging them not based on what's happening for them right then on the show, but for what is going to happen 2 years from now for them, And then people that haven't, I think, are confused by certain things, like, why am I seeing this right now? But we know you need to know this to know that.
Right. I think we could talk about the Red Wedding a little bit, which is that it's almost a fool me twice situation with, if you go back to season 1 and the death of Ned Stark. At this point, if somebody out there is still watching the show thinking that it's about picking teams and picking the hero and who's going to save the day, the show's misrepresented itself because that's not what the show. I think this season established clearly more than the previous two that this is really now about following each individual character on their journey and not about like who's going to wind up sitting on the throne at the end because there's just really no way to tell. And so if you had your bets placed on the Starks, the Red Wedding was kind of a much an even bigger way than season 1 of saying this isn't about hedging your bets. This isn't about figuring out who's going to come out on top at the end. It's just about where these stories are taking them. And I think Arya kind of demonstrates that the best because, and I think this season, I enjoyed her story this season more than I did in the books. And I think it demonstrated a lot better just because she had a great story in season 2 in the books, and she managed to sort of triumph and get out of Harrenhal and do some really cool things. And then you're like, oh, she's really figuring out a way to adapt to her surroundings and change her character and her disposition to overcome these obstacles. And then this year, it's just she can't overcome them.
Right.
She's too young. She's too powerless, regardless of her determination, to make any headway in the cruel, war-ravaged world she's in. And I think, Hot Pie leaving her, Gendry leaving her, but then also in a really cool way that they incorporated him into Stannis' story, her seeing the shallow and petty side and the numbers game side to the Brotherhood itself.
Oh, yeah.
When they traded Gendry to Melisandre, it's just one disheartening moment after the next. And then capping that all off with the Red Wedding, it's just seeing how, what her, when she's doing her Syrio Forel lessons in season 1, you're like, yeah, she's gonna be this badass, and if there's somebody out there with the guts for revenge, it's gonna be Arya. But like, how can she do that? Like, how could she possibly overcome anything?
No matter how much she wants to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, especially seeing how vicious and clever the bad guys, if you're going to call them that, are in this show. We're already obviously touching upon this with naming some characters we've loved, but I'll start with you, Roth, about what are to you sort of your favorite standout characters from this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I have overall favorites or people that I enjoy sort of their storyline. But this season, I feel like Jaime had probably one of the stronger arcs, just because I think it's remarkable when you remind yourself this is a person that one of the very first things we saw him do was push a little boy out of a window and try and kill him. And
right.
Yet he has become one of the most sympathetic, one of the most complex, one of the most interesting characters on the show. And the way that his characters developed, both in the books and in the show, is so rich and so nuanced. And I think that, to echo what Matt was saying, this is really about human beings and behavior, more than winning or losing. Though I do think that will play out as well, ultimately. And how we become who we are. You know what I mean? I think one of the things that he does is open up on certain characters, and you think they're a certain way. Varys is one of them. You have certain assumptions about this kind of character, or Littlefinger. And then over time, you find out more and more about who they are and what's motivating them. And it's often not what you think it was. And then you start with somebody like Arya or like Jaime, and you watch them develop into who they are. I mean, Jaime is who he is, and we're learning he's kind of both those things, right?
Yeah. He's
becoming a different person. It's like a redemption song for him a little bit. But we're also learning more about what he did, how many lives he saved. I think that was a huge reveal this season for him, that why he is the Kingslayer and what he sort of had to put up with, but why he did what he did. Mm-hmm. I think tells you a lot about him. And then with Arya and Sansa, they start out as two little princesses of the North, in a way, and then they're becoming these very different human beings. And it's the story of why we become who we are, what's inherent in you, and how outside forces shape you. That was an endless way to say Jaime and Arya probably were the two.
Hey, there's a lot happens to these guys.
I just wish it's one of those moments where now we can talk about it because it's happened on the show, but going back to season 1, Jaime was the first person people hated. This is before Joffrey was a known monster. He was a tool, he was a liar and a coward, but he wasn't doing the horrible things he did once he became king. So Jaime was really the first person. He was. They had those scenes with him and Ned where they were so adversarial and pithy and passive aggressive. He was so smug and people hated him. And you wanted to kind of say to people who hadn't read the books back then and watching it on the TV show, what if I told you he would wind up becoming one of your favorite characters? Mm-hmm. And that's what this show is about. And people, people wouldn't really been able to comprehend that until they watched his storyline through season 3. And that's what this show does, is that it takes your heroes and punishes them in cruel and horrible ways for tiny mistakes made out of passion and honor, like Robb Stark marrying Talisa and then beheading Lord Karstark, these things. And he gets paid back 100 times worse. The innocent are punished, and the villains get redeemed. Mm-hmm. So, and not that there are villains out there not all villains get redeemed. There are still horrible people out there that have no sympathy, like, Joffrey. Now Walder Frey and so on. So I would say, Arya and Jaime still continue to be my favorites. Daenerys is an interesting thing because she had some really, really cool moments at the first half of this season, dealing with the slave traders in Astapor, and her big triumphant moment at the end of episode 4 when her dragons burned the place down and the slaves turned on the masters, and she walked away with 8,000 unsullied in her army. Just a great shot. Going forward, though, she's going to always run kind of hot and cold with people, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
She's boastful. One of the things people had a big problem about with her in season 2 was her boasting and her just sort of the way she carried herself when she had nothing, which probably is a survival technique. But for me personally, and I would assume others as well, like I'm a big Jorah Mormont fan, and whatever the age difference and whether or not you ship them or not, but you can see the direct connection and the affection there that he has for her, and the way that she, regards him, I think, going forward, and even in this season, is, I think, I think the way that she, like, by the end, he's jealous sexually of the way that she sees Dario. Yeah, At first, it was like him and Barristan battling to be
just trying to be her, the guy who fights for her.
But now he's like actually like, maybe another side of Jorah's coming out, and the way that she appreciates him or not appreciates him, I think, colors her, because we've seen him as an audience.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry. I think Daenerys she's a fascinating character in the way that people respond to her. When they love her, why they love her, when they hate her, why they hate her. She overall, probably the characters that I love Tyrion and I love Daenerys. And I feel like she's often completely misunderstood. I really do. I think her decisions have been remarkable given what she started out with. Thrown into a completely different culture when she's 13 years old. I mean, I know in the world of the show she's a bit older, right? And so I think that confuses things. And married to this man, she doesn't even speak his language, and so you could just say, fuck it, I give up, I crumble, I'm not going to fuck life, right? But sorry, I'm cursing. I
know, I have no way to bleep this, so sorry.
Right. I'm so sorry, guys. Sorry. But she doesn't do that. She doesn't lay down and die. She learns the language. She learns the culture. She becomes a queen because she has to in that version of a queen, right? And she respects it. She learns to respect what it has to offer, even if it means learning how to have sex really well with him to do the things that she needs to do, that she believes in. And so I just don't understand how you dislike someone who's like, I think it's a really good idea for people to have their liberty.
Well, that's a whole other side of it. That was something that came out this season most of all, was her newfound, her caring for the plight of the slaves, coming into Slaver's Bay for the first time, knowing what she went through in season 1. That's a whole other side of her that got sort of awoken this season. That I don't think people dislike her because of that at all. I think if people dislike her, there are other reasons, and I'm specifically going back to season 2, which didn't really serve her that well, I don't think. And
neither did book 2 that well.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just saying that there are moments when people are solidly behind her, and there are other moments. And again, it's not saying that any of these characters are supposed to be. I'm going to agree
Perfect.
with you 100% of the time. They're going to make decisions, and you're going to agree with them and with some of them, and not agree with others. I would say like people are way more accepting of not agreeing with decisions on a show like Game of Thrones than say Walking Dead, where if a character makes a decision that people don't agree with because it's such a survival apocalyptic scenario, you hate that person, because they're going to get you and your group killed. This is a show where you're used to not agreeing. You don't agree with Robb either when he beheads Lord Karstark, because you know sort of what that means, where he sort of gets honorable tunnel vision about it. But you still like him as a character. Like, you're still able to appreciate him as a fully fleshed out character. Daenerys is the same way. But I think, with the introduction of Daario at the end of the season, it doesn't distract her from what her mission is, because she still has this drive to free all these slaves and go into Yunkai. But it does, for the first time, I think. And again, her season 1 arc is, I think, still my favorite. Harken back to the fact that after all these confident scenes of her pulling these really badass moves, this is how young she is, and she's still able to become really smitten, distractedly so perhaps, by this really jarring.
But he's so dreamy.
He's so dreamy.
But why is it? I mean, and that's what I don't understand. Like, why is it okay for other characters? I don't understand about the fan base. It's like it's okay for other characters to have human frailty, but not her, right? Like, she's
I'm not saying it's not okay. I'm just saying.
No, I'm not saying about you, because I don't hear that from you. But I'm just saying, like, what I read in comments, what people say about Daenerys. It's odd.
First of all, you're reading comments.
Yeah, so they're gonna be horrible. Don't forget.
So, yeah, step 1, don't read the comments.
Right. For me, you guys, again, I'll just say I completely agree as far as Jaime is concerned this season being awesome, and Arya. But I do want to piggyback on that to say that the Hound became a really favorite character of mine this season. And again, I like that Game of Thrones is never clear-cut. It's not like, oh, we thought the Hound was a bad guy. He's really a good guy, or even he's an anti-hero. He's not any of that. It's not that clear-cut. He is a guy who will do really horrible things if that's sort of the task he's given at the time. But you kind of just get this interesting idea of him as he's definitely not a horrible, cruel person. That's especially important on Game of Thrones, because someone like Joffrey goes out of his way to be cruel and gets pleasure from cruelty, where the Hound has done some terrible things, but we just see that he's very straightforward about it. He's like, well, yeah, I did those horrible things because the king, who was the person I took orders from, told me to. So I really loved the Hound this season and his relationship with Arya, and really kind of getting, and the way they play it is very good, because it's not like she suddenly is like, oh, I like this guy who I hate. But she definitely has some confusion and is a little bit unclear about what she should think about him, given the fact that, she has a lot of reasons to hate him ahead of time.
With the mention of the Hound there, I think it brings up a perfect example of who's best suited for this world. Because the Starks clearly aren't. I mean,
right.
As far as the more honorable ones who got taken care of at the Red Wedding. So who's meant for this world? It's someone like the Hound. And then Littlefinger, who, I think was great that they actually took him out of the season when he actually left King's Landing. He had that great Chaos as a Ladder speech talking about who is fit to rise up in these moments, the opportunists. Littlefinger is still not someone that we hate as much as others, despite the fact that he betrayed Ned. He is an opportunist, and he makes the smart plays. And he has that line that's sort of like, only by admitting what we are to ourselves can we get what we want. Mm-hmm. So he knows who he is, he knows what he wants, and he knows, how he's going to get it. And then again, I commend the show by sort of taking him out, and I wish they would have done that more with Theon, who they felt the need to put in at least every other episode with the torture scenes, which I just want to touch on as saying didn't work for me. because they became exhausting after a while. And for those who've read the books, there was no mystery. So I think it was one of the first instances where we knew who this guy was, Ramsay Snow. And for those who hadn't read the books, it was sort of this reveal. But to us, it wasn't. It was just the wait for them to decide whether or not when it was a good time to tell us.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, Matt, that it was like it wasn't even like a giant secret. You could figure out it was Ramsay if you remembered back to season 2 and knowing that Roose Bolton's bastard had been sent. But I do agree with you that I think they kept it secretive because they wanted to kind of let you not think that Roose could be capable of such cruelty.
It would have been the show would have been tipping its hat a little too much, maybe, to Roose being somebody directly connected to a psycho.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense why they did. But it did become repetitive. It did become, I mean, it wasn't just difficult to watch and then it was difficult to watch. Well, it was mostly just difficult to watch because it was just this horrible torture over and over and over again. And it was like, oh my God.
I think it actually, for the first time on the show, takes you out of the show. Because I found myself thinking, this is a horrible storyline for actor Alfie Allen to have to go through for the season.
Right.
What would he have gone through this whole time in this room, you know?
But the one thing that it did do is that, for me, and other people feel differently, but for me, Theon was, at the end of last season, pretty irredeemable. There was no way that I really hated him because I had a lot of sympathy. I understood why he made the decisions that he did, and I think it's actually a testament to Alfie Allen and to the choices that they made in terms of his dialogue that I really understood where he was coming from, why he did the things that he did. But I really hated that those were the choices that he was making. I think that he made very specific choices as an actor to have Theon come off as kind of a brat who was a little ill-equipped for the situation that he found himself in and the level of power that was being thrown around. But he was so fundamentally selfish. You know, everything he did was really not to be iron-born again. It wasn't about that. It was about sort of him getting one over on his dad and his mom and his sister and then the Starks. And he made these horrible decisions, and they were completely self-motivated. So I hated him. And then he killed 2 little kids and burned them up. You know, I just felt like there's just no way I'm gonna be on board with the end. But eventually, I was like, okay, enough.
Yeah, this is a show that can punish someone you hate to the point where you're like, I get it. You know, like that. We're done with this now because. And one of the things this season did was they took him out and they did that whole fake hunt thing right before he started getting really tortured by Ramsay. Ramsay let him escape and then brought him back and all that.
So mean.
And during that part is when they had Theon actually break down and admit for his whole reasons why he did what he did, because he admired the Starks and actually felt like they were his real family and that Ned was his real father, more so than Balon. Like, he actually admitted all this, and his whole motivation, yeah, in the back of his head it was like, I can impress my father by taking Winterfell, but he really wanted to be accepted at Winterfell.
Yeah.
And that was his whole thing. Like, even if I have to conquer it, I will make them. I will create the family I always wanted at Winterfell. And right when he did that is when things became even worse for him. You know, they let him get out that cathartic moment, and then they tortured him even more. You know.
I think it just proves, like, I mean, it's definitely sort of a less is more, though, because, you know, I think it's safe to say, without giving away other things that happen in the books later, you know, we've already talked about the fact that the stuff with Theon, it's not like it's invented as far as it never happened in the books. It just happened off page. We were told about it later instead of seeing it because we weren't with Theon when it was happening. So I do think that, yeah, it became a little bit repetitive and a little bit, you know, just even on a show that we know has a lot of dark moments and you're prepared for that, it was a little bit unrelenting with how much this was occurring, how much we were seeing of it, that I think maybe, you know, 2 episodes, you know, might have been able to cover a little better.
Yeah, and the best, to your point, Matt, the best portion of that storyline, I mean, I will say this, like he Ramsay is a great villain in that he's just completely psychotic, like in a very different way than Joffrey is completely psychotic. I mean, he is like he'd be a great like serial killer in a modern, in a serial killer TV show. But the best moment, the most fruitful moment was when Theon was able to confess, basically, where and that to me, I really felt like, okay, I hated you so much at the end of that last season, but I feel like I understand you now, even more. I feel like I get who you are, and that's the rich moments on the show. And then I just have to watch you suffer and bleed for several more weeks.
In
Right.
fact, that
and
episode,
get things cut off you, which happened a
yeah,
lot. This season.
and George R. Martin even wrote the scene for that episode where the naked girls came in and they tantalized him for the final time before Ramsay's like, "I'm cutting your penis off." But like, if that scene hadn't been there, right? Take that whole Theon scene out of that episode, and then just the next thing you see is Balin and what's her name, Yara on the
Yara.
show.
Mhm.
Getting the note and getting the dick in the box. You know what I mean? Like, we could have gotten the message that horrible things continue to happen to Theon. I think it would have actually been better. Just like, yeah, again, like, we didn't need as many scenes. And like, I sort of leapt to the Theon discussion after talking about Littlefinger because, yeah, they took him out of the episode when he needed to be out. Well, they took him off the season when he needed to be gone. Whereas last season, they included him a lot more in things that happened off page, like when he went down to the Tyrells and brokered these deals and so forth. They kept him on the show, but this year they didn't.
Right.
So Theon, I think, could have been in 3 or 4 episodes instead of the amount he was in.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up. But I want to end by asking everyone what was sort of their favorite, moment or two from the season. What stood out to you as a scene or a interaction between characters that really struck you as being one of your favorites? Start with you, Roth.
I mean, I think the big moments stand out because those are the big moments, so early on, episode 4 was with Daenerys, and the triumphant moment with the dragons where she shows them, like, don't talk about ladies behind their back that way, and also don't have slaves.
Right.
Which I think are 2 fair lessons. I think it was really more about the slaves. But that was a great moment, and certainly the Red Wedding was a tragic moment and very hard to watch, but I thought it was really well done. But actually, like, I do think that some of the quieter moments tend to be the ones that I love. So oddly enough, I loved the conversation between Gendry and Davos. There was something in that I thought was very revelatory about 2 people that were from the lower echelons of this world, and kind of getting a window into what that is for them. And I love that line, we're not even people to you, we're 1,000,000 ways to get what you want. There's something about that feels to me very indicative about what George, I mean, I can't speak for him, but indicative for one of the things that I think is fundamental to what this story is about, in terms of I don't know, just how people use each other,
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that moment. And yeah, I know there's another one I was saying. Oh, Arya, Arya and the Hound. I'm gonna kill you one day, basically.
Right.
I mean, there was something so beautiful about the moment between that moment and her first kill.
Mm-hmm.
When he basically says, like, hey man, do what you're gonna do, but let me know, like, let a brother know, give a brother some warning, and I'll help you out. So I think that those were my favorite moments, probably, that stand out. But Jamie and you said 2. I'm out.
I think one of us at least is going to get to your moment.
Jamie and Brienne in the bathtub.
Matt, what about you?
Yeah, as Roth was naming all the moments, I was like, okay, I got to cross it off my list. So she's like, she hasn't mentioned Jamie in the bath, so I'm going to say it. But then she mentioned it. But yeah, Jamie and Brienne in the bath, and the whole him explaining his role and the actual sacking of King's Landing and the death of the Mad King. and then his sort of "My name is Jamie" breakdown was great. The bear pit, pretty much I thought the Jamie Brienne arc was handled really well. I don't care that they sort of left out the Brave Companions and sort of switched Vargo Hoat to Locke. I think it still all worked really well. In fact, it actually, now Jamie actually has sort of, now that we kind of like Jamie again, he's got a nemesis out there in the form of this guy, because nothing was settled between him and Locke aside from the fact that he just rescued Brienne from the bear pit. Also, the Chaos is a Ladder speech from Littlefinger. I really like that. Arya telling, I don't know how do you say it, Gendry or Gendry, but sort of like her saying, "I could be your family" to him, which is she's not someone who, understandably because of the things she's gone through, opens up at all, and that's like the first and probably last time she's going to actually say her feelings out loud that aren't murderous feelings. So I thought that was really well done. And then again, like what Roth was touching on with his scene with Davos, Gendry sort of misunderstands her, doesn't realize that she's taking a big step there by actually expressing her affinity for him, because it's not something she does, but he sort of falls back on his distrust of nobles. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Almost immediately, and it's that sounds nice, but we all know how it's going to play out. He's, of course, assuming that she'll get home one day and be taken back up to her position of being, a Stark. But I thought that was handled really well.
Yeah, I love the Jamie sort of, telling the true story of the Kingslayer story so much. I have to mention it as well. It really is a powerful, powerful scene that I think, some people were already coming around on Jamie, but I think it helped a lot of other people see him in a new light, and, what that name really meant to this guy, and, the sort of strange duality of it all, especially because it was interesting that he was on what people considered the right side of this revolution, but was still considered a horrible person for what he did because he was supposed to stand by the king. But that really explained everything in a very different, here's what you don't know way, and made him wonderfully sympathetic. And then I want to mention, I'm kind of cheating myself here, I guess, because it's not a moment per se, but several moments. But the Marjorie Cersei interaction, I thought was just so well done all season. A lot of it, just dealing with the fact that there's this power struggle over Joffrey. On one hand, it's very important because he is the king and what that means. On the other hand, of course, it's completely emotional too. Well, for Cersei, it's very emotional. And just watching that little chess match, I thought was really fun, very interesting. The fact that Marjorie often had the upper hand, the fact that she's such a outgoing person, she helps sickly children, and you don't know if any of it is for real. Is some of it for real? You certainly know that part of it is calculated, and that she is so good at PR and sort of what that means in this world, and dealing with politics in a way that wasn't at all boring or stodgy, but very interesting because there was a very personal sort of big thing brewing between these two women as they both jostled for power and for control of this king who we all hate, but he's a very powerful person in this world.
Yeah. Marjorie was awesome. I think, and that's why, because you're doing nice things, but I don't know why you're doing them, and I have some suspicions.
Right.
But the Chaos is a Ladder, Chaos is a Pit, I think, moment kind of wraps up so gorgeously the two ways to view this world.
Yeah.
And I think that Varys in that moment suddenly became one of my heroes, because I really was he does have the greater good. I think in many ways he does have the greater good in mind.
And then in the end, he actually, it's funny because right in the season finale when he's talking to Shay is when he sort of outs himself as, we kind of knew it, but a big supporter of Tyrion. For the first time he said, I think Tyrion actually has the mind and the heart for what this realm needs, and I'm gonna back him. He should be the leader, is basically what he said.
Yeah.
He could be good for this world, and it's something that no one has said. No one has said directly to Tyrion. We can see it as an audience, but and it also is sort of indicative of as why, seeing the two difference of opinions between Varys and Littlefinger, why they're always so pithy and at odds with each other. Like
Yeah.
it actually
Well,
goes a
because
lot deeper.
Littlefinger's out for self. I mean, he's just out for himself. That's it. And I think that Varys will protect himself, and he will do many things in order to protect himself. But he does have the bigger picture in mind. You know.
Now, Matt, we'll end with you because you are writing the full review of season 3. You should look for it on IGN.com/TV. But what is your score? What score are you giving season 3 of Game of Thrones?
I'm giving it a 9.
Mhm.
It's actually, if I look back and I rated the first 2 seasons a little higher, but I think this season, it's still, of course, a great score. I think aside from the Theon stuff and a little bit of the balancing act they had to do with some of the characters this year, I think it just lowered it a little bit to a 9. It's still an excellent, amazing season of television, and I think that it'll be funny going into next season because that's essentially mostly the second half of the third book. This season had like 20 new characters, and we're not going to have that next season because they've already been the new characters for this book have been introduced this year.
Yeah.
Going into next year, there'll be like maybe 4 or 5, that maybe still need to be brought out onto the screen. So I think this is maybe the last big time when we're going to get this big influx of all these new faces that people seem to have a hard, who haven't read the books have a hard time keeping track of.
Right.
But yeah, that's my score.
Okay, well, cool. Well, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on Game of Thrones. I know we're all very excited to see the show return next year, but plenty to talk about between now and then, and we'll be back with more. Keep on checking out IGN.com/TV. Thanks.